Sometimes stories about Hollywood are filled with drama that never made it to screen, and when it comes to Nancy Kulp and Buddy Ebsen, well, their story is the kind that makes you lean in a little closer before the Beverly Hillbillies 3. These two into the same spotlight, their lives were already packed with decades of experiences that could feel in teary books, but here's the thing: what happened before that iconic show elicits the stage for the tension that simmered between them later. Let's start with Nancy. She wasn't your typical Hollywood star. Born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, she was the only child of Robert and Marjorie Kulp. Her dad was a traveling salesman, always on the move, while her mom juggled teaching and later became a school principal. Nancy grew up in a world of structure and education. Moving to Miami when she was still young, by 1943, she'd earned a degree in journalism and seemed set for a life behind the pen instead of in front of camera. But Nancy's journey wasn't a straight shot. She was writing for the Miami Beach Tropics, a local paper, interviewing big names like Clark Gable and royalty like the Duke and Duchess. Officer, not exactly small potatoes. Right then World War II came calling, and Nancy didn't hesitate. She left her studies to join the US Naval Reserve, picture her young, determined, earning the rank of lieutenant while serving her country. Now let's pause there for a second and flip coin to Buddy Ebsen. He was as different from Nancy as you could get. Born and raised in Orlando, Florida, Buddy dreamed of dancing when he and his sister Vilma hit the vaudeville circuit. They were billed as the baby of stairs. Buddy had this easy, laid-back charm. People loved watching him dance, but life wasn't all smooth sailing when Buddy got to New York with barely enough money to grab a sandwich. He knew he had to hustle. If hustle paid off, Broadway camping, and soon Hollywood wasn't far behind. Buddy landed roles in musicals, danced with Shirley Temple, and even got upped by Walt Disney himself to help animate Mickey Mouse's moves. But things aren't always so magical. Buddy's career hit a major snag when he was cast as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. It sounds like a dream gig, right? Not so much. The makeup they used had aluminum dust, and it nearly killed him. He ended up in the hospital, and the role went to someone else. After that, Buddy turned to other gigs, including sailing and teaching naval officers during World War II. He might have been easygoing, but life had given him his fair share of angst. Now picture Nancy and Buddy, two people from completely different worlds, both with their own quirks and drive. By the time 1950 seconds rolled around, Nancy had moved to Hollywood. She'd gotten married, thought didn't last, and taken a job in Mixed publicity department. A director spotted her and thought she had the face for acting. Soon she was popping up in small roles, playing everything from a maid on Love Lucy to a drunken waitress on Maverick. Nancy wasn't a leading lady, but she had this knack for stealing scenes with her sharp wit and nuanced attitude. Meanwhile, Buddy was busy carving out a space for himself in television. He had a knack for playing folksy, down-to-earth characters that audiences couldn't help but love. He'd already built a reputation as someone reliable, someone easy to work with. At least that's how he came across to most folks. But here's where things get interesting. By the late 50s, Nancy and Buddy's paths had started crossing in the world of television. They weren't technically working side by side yet, but the town wasn't that big. Nancy was earning a reputation as a smart, hard-working actress, but she also had strong opinions and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Buddy, on the other hand, was known for being more traditional, maybe even a bit old-fashioned, passionate in his views. Before the Beverly Hillbillies came along, both were chasing opportunities where they could. Nancy had a string of guest spots on popular shows. She didn't have the typical Hollywood look, and she knew it, but that didn't stop her. She leaned into her unique style, playing quirky, memorable characters. Buddy, meanwhile, was bouncing between westerns, dramas, and the occasional comedy. He wasn't afraid to take on roles that showed a darker side, either playing villains on shows like Gunsmoke and Maverick. By the early 1960s, both had made their mark in Hollywood in their own ways, but neither of them had found that big breakout role yet that was about to change, of course, with the Beverly Hillbillies. When the Beverly Hillbillies hit TV screens, it was like a rocket blasting off. People couldn't getting out of the Clampets. This simple backwoods family suddenly surrounded by Beverly Hills glitz. The show was funny, charming, and a bit ridiculous, and it hooked millions of viewers week after week. At the center of it, Nancy Kulp and Buddy Ebsen. When the creators of the Beverly Hillbillies were casting, they knew they needed someone special to play Jane Hathaway, the efficient birdwatching secretary who works for Mr. DeLeith Clampett's banker. Nancy was a perfect fit, and Buddy, well, by then he was a familiar face in the industry. His easygoing demeanor and knack for playing wise fatherly characters made him an obvious choice for Jed Clampett. Jed was the backbone of the Clampett family, a man with little formal education but plenty of common sense. Buddy brought warmth and charm to the role, making Jed someone viewers felt they could trust and root for. When the show premiered, it was an instant hit. People loved the fish-out off-water story of a family from the Ozarks striking oil and moving into a Beverly Hills mansion. The Clampetts weren't just funny, they were relatable. Their simple wit clashing with the extravagance of Beverly Hills created all kinds of hilarious misunderstandings, and right there in the middle of it all was Nancy Kulp as Miss Jane. Miss Jane wasn't just any secretary, she was smart, loyal, and often the voice of reason. When Mr. Dollar, her boss, got a little too greedy, Sheganui cared about the Clampetts, especially Jed's nephew Jethro, and if you've ever watched the show, you know Miss Jane had a bit of a crush on Jethro, and she played her with such a mix of humor and heart that you couldn't help but love her. She even earned an Emmy nomination for the role. Buddy's portrayal of Jed was just as iconic. Jed was the glue holding the family together. While Granny stirred up trouble, Elime charmed everyone with her sweetness, and Jethro bumbled his way through one wild scheme after another. Jed stayed calm. He was the voice of reason in a family full of chaos, and that catchphrase of his, "well, doggies," became part of American pop culture. But here's where things get a little complicated on screen. Nancy and Buddy's characters had a warm, friendly relationship off screen. It so much the tension between them didn't come from their acting styles or their professionalism. No, it was something deeper. Their personalities, and more importantly their views on the world, clashed in ways that couldn't be ignored. You see, Buddy was politically conservative, and he didn't shy away from sharing his opinions. Nancy, on the other hand, leaned more liberal. It wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was a fundamental divide in how they saw the world. Now imagine working with someone every day who stands for everything you don't agree with. That's what Nancy and Buddy were dealing with. According to their cast members, they'd get into this heated debates sometimes for weeks on, and it wasn't just light teasing or friendly banter, it was serious despicity tension. Both actors stayed professional on set. They had to. The show was a massive success, pulling in millions of viewers every week. For a while, it was the #1 show on TV, and its popularity didn't fade easily. People loved the Clampetts in their antics, and as much as Nancy and Buddy might have disagreed in real life, they brought their characters to life perfectly. Nanny's Miss Jane became one of the most beloved characters on the show. She wasn't flashy or over the top, but she was relatable. She was the kind of person who worked hard, tried to do the right thing, and always seemed to get caught in the middle of someone else's mess. And while her crush on Jethro might have been played for laughs, there was something sweet about it too. Meanwhile, Buddy's Jed was the steady hand guiding the Clampetts through on a ridiculous situation after another, whether he was trying to make sense of Beverly Hills high society or helping Granny cook up another batch of moonshine. Jed always kept his cool. It's no wonder people tuned in week after week to see what the Clampetts would do next. But even with all the success, the tension between Nancy and Buddy never really went away. Some say it got worse as the show went on. It wasn't just politics, it was a clash of personalities. Nancy was sharp, intellectual, and didn't back down from a fight, but he was charming, sure, but he could also be stubborn. When those two forces collided, sparks flew. It didn't help that the show kept them in close quarters. As Miss Janie and Jed, they shared plenty of scenes together, and while they might have smiled and laughed on screen, there was an undercurrent of frustration that those who were paying attention could ignore. Donna Douglas, who played Elime, once said they'd argue for weeks about their differing views. Can you imagine how tense that set must have been? Still, they were both professionals and they didn't let their disagreements ruin the show. That's not to say it was easy, though, keeping things civil while working so closely with someone you clash with takes effort, but they pulled it off, and the audience never saw the tension that bubbled beneath the surface. By the time the Beverly Hillbillies ended its run, it had become a cultural phenomenon. People still talk about it today, and its influence can be seen in countless other shows. For Nancy and Buddy, though, the end of the show didn't mean the end of their story. Their differences would continue to shape how they interacted even after the camera stopped rolling. Nancy decided to pursue a completely new path, politics, in 1984, years after the show wrapped. Sharon for a seat in the US House of Representatives. She was 62 at the time, and while some people questioned if an actress could make the jump into politics, Nancy believed she could bring something valuable to the table. After all, Ronald Reagan had done it, hadn't he? Nancy ran as a Democrat in Pennsylvania's 9th Congressional District. It was a tough race from the start. The district was solidly Republican, and her opponent Bud Shuster had already served 6 terms, but Nancy wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She campaigned hard, connecting with people and sharing her ideas for change. Even though she knew the odds were against her, she gave it her all. What she didn't expect was for Buddy Ebsen to step into the fight, and not on her side. Buddy, who had no ties to Pennsylvania or Thrace, volunteered to record a radio ad for her opponent. In the ad, he called Nancy too liberal and accused her of fusing her celebrity status to sway voters. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was personal. Nancy felt blindsided. For years she and Buddy had butted heads, but this felt like a betrayal on a whole new level. Nancy didn't hold back when she spoke about it later. She said Buddy had no business getting involved and should have stayed out of it. He's not secondly old Jed Clampett that you saw on the show, she said in one interview. Clearly frustrated, she also made it clear that while they'd never gotten along, she would have never done something like that to him. You could hear the hurt in her words. Even years after the fact, the ad didn't help Nancy campaign. In fact, it might have hurt it. She lost the election by a significant margin, with her opponent taking more than 66% of the vote. Afterward, Nancy said she didn't blame Buddy for her defeat, but the sting of his action stayed with her. She left Pennsylvania for a while to clear her head. Reader Ninganly, after she'd had time to process what had happened, Buddy, for his part, didn't seem to regret his actions at the time. He firmly believed in what had said about Nancy and stood by it, but as the years passed, it seems even he started to feel some remorse toward the end of his life. He expressed regret over the ad and the way their feud had spiraled out of control. Unfortunately, by then it was too late to fully mend their relationship. Nancy and Buddy had very little contact after the campaign. When they did reconcile, it was brief. Nancy found solace in teaching, a passion that allowed her to channel her knowledge and experience into something meaningful. She became an artist and residence at Uniata College, a small liberal art school nestled in Pennsylvania's quiet countryside. There she taught acting classes and inspired countless students who came through her classroom doors. Her time at Uniata seemed to mark a peaceful chapter in her life, away from the bright lights of Hollywood and the turbulence of politics. Nancy found a community that valued her for her insight and warmth. Students later spoke about how much they admired her, not just for her Hollywood fame, but for her dedication to helping others grow. She brought humor and heart to her lessons, making her students feel the stage could be a place for everyone, no matter where they came from. It's easy to imagine her smiling as she shared stories of her days on the Beverly Hillbillies, sprinkling in advice about life both on and off the stage. Nancy also spent time performing in local theater productions and occasionally made guest appearances on television. She never fully stepped away from acting, even as she shifted her focus to teaching. It was clear she loved that craft, and her later work reflected a deep appreciation for the power of storytelling. But she didn't just act, she lived a full and vibrant life outside of the spotlight. Nancy had a knack for connecting with people well, whether it was her students, friends, or neighbors, and she made the most of her time. In 1990, however, Nancy faced a new challenge when she was diagnosed with cancer. Despite the diagnosis, she remained as determined as ever, continuing to teach and stay active in her community for as long as her health allowed. Friends and colleagues described her as brave and strong, qualities she had shown throughout her life. She passed away in 1991, leaving behind a legacy that went far beyond her role as Miss Jane Hathaway. Nye's story was one of persistence, creativity, and a refusal to be defined by one chapter of her life. Buddy Ebsen, meanwhile, had his own path in those later years. Though he stayed in the entertainment industry, his work slowed down as he aged. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended, Buddy kept acting, taking roles in movies and television shows. He even starred in a popular detective series called Barnaby Jones, which ran for several years and kept him in the public eye. But no matter what headed, people couldn't help but associate him with Jed Clampett. That character, with his homespun charm and iconic catchphrase, had become larger than life, but he didn't seem to mind the association, at least not outwardly. He embraced the love fans had for Jed, even if it meant occasionally being typecast. But privately, it wasn't always easy. Imagine building a career full of variety and talent, only to be remembered for one role. Still come, Buddy handled it with grace, often appearing at events and interviews where he happily reminisced about his time on the Beverly Hillbillies. He wrote a memoir later in life, sharing stories about Hollywood His career and yes, even the infamous feud with Nancy outside of acting, Buddy had plenty to keep him busy. He was an accomplished sailor and spent much of his free time on the water. He also dabbled in writing, penning novels that gave him a creative outlet. Beyond acting, Buddy had always been a man of benevolence, and he found ways to stay active and engaged even as the years went by. In his personal life, Buddy enjoyed a long marriage to Dorothy, not his third wife, and spent his later years surrounded by family. He lived to the remarkable age of 95, passing away in 2003. By then, most of his contemporaries were long gone, and he was one of the last living connections to the golden age of television. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy lived on through the countless runs of the Beverly Hillbillies and the memories of those who had worked with him. Looking back, their story feels like a collision of two strong personalities who just couldn't find common ground. They were both passionate, talented, and fiercely opinionated, and their differences created a rift that was hard to bridge. Still, it's impossible to ignore the magic they created together on screen, as Jed and Miss Janethy brought laughter and warmth to millions of viewers, a testament to their professionals and talent.